this week's edition of Debriefing the Law. I am Joel Oster.
And I am Chris Marone.
And today is a special day. It's Good Friday edition, so we are going to try to make this topical. It's also a day in celebration of a Jackie Robinson. This was the first day that, back when, what was it, 1947, 1948?
April 15th, 1947.
So on tax day, apparently he decided to make his debut there with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and we're going to talk about that during our Courtroom Quarterback segment. Also, we have an interview today where I've interviewed Tahmina Watson, an immigration law expert, and she had fascinating things to say about the current state of immigration. Excited to have her on as well for that interview. But first, Chris, I want to talk about some real important stuff, a message that everyone needs to hear. And that is this: do-it-yourselfers. Is that a good thing? Is that a noble thing? Or is that proof that you are an idiot? What say you? I have plumbing issues. Okay, actual water. I'm not just talking about my digestive tract. But nonetheless, I'm saying when I have a backup in the drains. And so should I try to fix it myself? What would you do? Or would you hire the experts?
Yeah, if it can't be fixed by me putting a snake down the toilet, I'm calling the experts straight up 100%. And I have actually anecdotal evidence for this. My wife and I have a 2-bedroom house. A 2-bathroom house. The second bathroom was having digestive issues. And so we tried to snake it and figure it out. And for months, nothing was working. And we brought in the professionals. They removed the toilet, and the subfloor had collapsed under the toilet.
Wow. Okay.
And so the main line was like a 1/4 inch off of the toilet. So not only were we feeding water under our house and all the things that go down the toilet, but it was just eroding the subfloor and the foundation. So you
took this to another level. I was just simply talking about the kitchen sink. Much better to talk about the kitchen sink.
Yes,
and so
much better.
What happened for my sink was the drain, then the pipes actually went about 7 foot horizontally, but there was a slight tilt the wrong direction. And so water would be going through this, and then water would be settling back down, and the grease would be settling back down, causing all kinds of artery hardening to go on. The grease would pack up on the outsides. So I would, over the years, I would try to snake it myself. I also hired the experts a couple of times, but all they did was brought in their snakes, and it just poked a hole through so that way water could flow. They never actually solved the problem. But hey, I'm here to tell you that I decided to pay the big bucks. I brought in the best plumber in town to come in, and then he brought a camera with him. So he put his camera all the way through my pipes.
I love this.
Make sure that all of the blockage and the grease or whatever that was packing the sides of the pipes got pushed through and cleaned out. And so, yes, you know what? Easter is coming. We can now do Easter dinner.
Good.
Because we have a kitchen sink to use. So that is why we are a little bit late here in doing our podcast this morning. But hey, there you go. Shout out to my plumber. If you're in the Kansas City area, want a name for a plumber, give me a call and I'll give you the person's name. Hey, this is Easter. This is Good Friday. So what, do you have any special Easter plans?
So my wife and I will attend church on Easter Sunday, and last week, my wife's sister was in town. Shout out to my niece Kate, who just got engaged last week to a wonderful gentleman. We're so excited for her. They flew in, my wife's sister. So we did a big Easter dinner with all the family in town last week to celebrate the engagement and to celebrate my sister-in-law being in town. So this Sunday,
what did you eat for dinner?
We had a ham, a brisket, and we had some vegan dish because my sister-in-law is vegan.
Okay, because I'm trying to figure out, what do you make for Easter? I guess ham is traditional. I'm just not really good with ham, and so I don't know how to smoke ham. It usually comes already prepared. I tried to do it with a glaze, and I ended up burning the entire glaze in the ham, and the entire kitchen was filled with smoke, so I don't know what to do. But you guys had...
Tri-tip, brisket, you're fine. Any sort of meat. Any sort of meat is good. It's like a Christmas dinner. You don't need to have a Christmas ham. You just have a Christmas hunk of meat. That's what we do.
I bought a brisket, so we will trim that brisket and smoke it, and then we'll call it good for Easter.
Right.
Hey, But since this is Good Friday and this is a legal podcast, we got to at least make mention of Good Friday. How did it get its name? It was a trial. In fact, I do this class called Trials of the Centuries, where I cover all the famous trials throughout the history of mankind. I find it interesting to study what was the legal system like during Socrates' day, the trial of Socrates. Right. What happened there? It might surprise you, Chris, to know that. Are you familiar with the trial of Socrates?
Not especially. I just know that at the end of the day, he was, banished to his house for the rest of his life? House arrest?
No, it's actually banished to a jail cell where he had to drink hemlock. It was capital punishment. He got the death sentence, drank hemlock, and he died. But the interesting thing I like, there's a lot of fascinating things about the Socrates trial. But what I want to comment on now was the actual voting process. You had 500 jurors listening to the trial. Wow. They each were given a stone disc, and there were 2 baskets as you left the court area. There was a guilty basket and a not guilty basket. And you would put your stone disc in whichever basket you thought was the right basket. Okay. They would count the disc up at the end of the day, and that's how you got your verdict. And he was found guilty of perverting the youth, corrupting the youth, and advancing religious deities that the state did not recognize. And he was found guilty and sentenced to death. But hey, we can talk about Socrates' trial a little bit later. We cover Socrates to O.J. Simpson. We covered all these fascinating trials. In fact, Chris, we're going to talk about those during this podcast and future podcasts. I want to do a series where we kind of highlight these various trials. Well, today is the anniversary of one of those trials. We're talking about the trial of Jesus. This is an historical trial. It's been talked about for thousands of years.
2022, exactly.
To be exact, and so it definitely has changed the landscape of I'll say our legal systems, but also our culture and the way we live life. And so let's talk a little bit about this trial. Now, so what happened here? Are you familiar with the Passion Play? I assume you're familiar with the Passion Play.
Yeah, actually, here in Mesa every year, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has the Mesa Temple here, and they're in the throes right now of the Easter pageant, where they do the entire life of Christ all the way up through the trial with Pontius Pilate through the resurrection. It's about a 2-hour outdoor play that's done by all local actors and singers and the whole 9 yards. So very familiar with that.
Okay, so I've seen a lot of Passion Plays, and I was a part of one that was put on by my church. The difference between those is that's obviously done from a religious perspective, right?
Yes.
We got our gospel accounts, and so this is what we know. When I teach my class, I try to distance myself from the religious perspectives and say, what is the historical account? We actually have 2 accounts of this trial by Josephus and then a Roman historian as well, whose name right now, I think it's Tiberius. I'm butchering his
Tiberius,
name. Yeah, 2 historians. One's a Roman historian, and the other one was Josephus, a Jewish historian, both non-Christians, who wrote about this trial. And so it's kind of interesting to see, to view this from a historical perspective and not necessarily just a religious perspective. All right, so here's what we know about the trials. First of all, you have to understand that Judea in this period of time was on the outer skirts of Roman rule. So you remember Caesar, Augusta, and Rome was the big deal in town. Rome obviously was headquartered there the Roman Empire was headquartered there in Rome and in Italy. And here Judea would have been on the outer skirts, but it still would have been under Roman control.
Rule. Yes.
But I think about 60 years earlier, it had been taken over and put under Roman rule. So you really had 2 different legal factions at play there in Judea. You had the Judea rule, the law, the Jewish rules, which was done by a Sanhedrin, and you had Israel. I mean, it was its own state with its own kingdom, with its own government. You think of King David was the king of Israel, so it had its own rule and system. But on top of that, now you had Rome that says that you're part of the Roman Empire. So you had this dual nature of Jewish law and Roman law. Now, Chris, I assume
Yes.
you're my one pupil here today for this class. Which law do you think ran supreme?
The Roman law.
Yeah, not even close, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Romans, they placated the Jewish people. Said, we're going to let you do what you want to do. It's your thing. It's your faith. We're going to let you kind of control your own affairs as long as you don't interfere with the Roman rule. So the Romans, what do they care about more than anything else?
Money and control, power.
Control. Yeah,
control.
They wanted control. They wanted the people to be able to live lives. Being a Roman citizen meant something. You wanted them to be. You wanted peace in the area. So if there was any disruption of that peace, that's going to be a problem. That is what the Romans did not want. So in that setting, you had John the Baptist. And John the Baptist came in, and he was somewhat of a rebel rouser. He was viewed as a rebel rouser. And so they wanted to take care of him. And he said some things about, I forget now the name. It was Herod. Antipas's wife or daughter. I forget.
His wife.
No. Okay. And that did not go over well. Well, nonetheless, they took that as an opportunity to behead him for what he did. Well, after that, then came another follower of John the Baptist, or, connected with that, Jesus. And he then posed a threat to peace and safety. And the Jewish people did not like this. Well, the actual crime. So you've been a follower of this Passion Play, this Trial of Jesus, for quite some time. What do you think was the actual crime that the Jewish people decided to pursue against Jesus, and then the Roman people pursued against Jesus?
I think it wasn't treason. It was, or maybe it was treason. I know it was like false gods. You know what? Actually, I'm thinking of like 5 different things. I don't know what the exact one was.
You were actually kind of right on. When you said treason, your gut reaction there ended up being the crime, I believe, at the end of the day, that Pontius Pilate cared about. Obviously, the Jewish people, they did not like the fact that he was causing disruption. He was saying, "Hey, look, I have this new way."
He claimed to be the Messiah. Yeah,
right, the second coming of the Messiah, and so they did not like his teaching, and so they wanted to shut him up. Well, when he came into the holy city that week, he came into the temple, and I forget what day it was during the week. He overturned the money changers' tables there in the temple court. Now,
Palm Sunday. It was Palm Sunday.
Right. It was after Palm Sunday, right? That all happens. There, he comes in on the donkey there on Palm Sunday.
On the donkey, they're waving the palm fronds at him, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. Everyone is loving on this person. Well, then he goes to the temple courts, and he starts to cause a commotion. Now, this is during Holy Week. This is during the festivals. A ton of people there are going to be in Jerusalem. Exactly. Passover. That was a big deal. That was, okay, now you're disturbing the peace. Now you got everyone's attention. You don't disturb the peace. And so that's when the Jewish leaders then said, okay, he's disturbing the peace. He overturned the money changers' tables there. We got to do something about this. And so about the arrest of Jesus that was done there in the Mount of Olives. What I am going to suggest most likely took place before this arrest is the Jewish leaders would have had to have gone to Pilate to get his blessing to arrest Jesus. Now, while normally they probably could have arrested Jesus for violation of one of their rules, this was a much bigger deal. And they was surely such a big deal. And they actually, one of the gospel accounts that say there was a Roman guard there. It's mainly the temple guards that went there. That would have been under the Jewish control. But there was a Roman influence as well that went there to arrest Jesus. I feel certain that they probably got this cleared by Pilate before they arrested Jesus. It wouldn't make sense they would do such a big arrest without getting the Roman governor's approval. Any thoughts?
Well, I totally agree. I think that the Roman governors didn't care a lot because this was a religious dispute at the time, and it wasn't messing too much with their power and control over the people, because in Jesus' earlier ministry, right, you render unto Caesar, which is Caesar, and render unto God, which is God's. And so he wasn't making a problem for the Romans. What I think the problem for the Romans was now Pontius and Caiaphas was now they were bringing the problem to the Romans, and they're just like, deal with it. Like,
Yes.
just
So
deal with it and get it done.
If they're going to go to Pontius Pilate at the end of the day, this is going to be an arrest done. That's going to really cause a big stir amongst the people during this Holy Week. I'm almost certain they would have gotten that cleared by the head honcho there in the area. They would have went to Pilate's place and said, hey, we are planning on arresting Jesus. What are your thoughts about it? And maybe that's why a Roman guard was sent along the way. They kind of stood on the outer skirts, but just kind of making sure the peace was not disturbed too much during this arrest. All right,
and
so
little did the Jews know that this was going to be a huge problem after 3 days.
Exactly. So then what they did was they went to Caiaphas' place, and Annas was his father-in-law, former high priest as well, and there was a lot of interaction. Now, there is some scholarly dispute as to what took place in the middle of the night. In other words, so Jesus was brought before Annas, he was brought before Caiaphas, was brought before the Sanhedrin. Were these actual trials, or would these more properly be thought of as grand jury proceedings? In other words, they're trying to gather to see what they had, see what charges they could bring against this person that they would eventually take before Pilate. So do you view these, and I know one of the Gospels mentions it as a trial, but it's also this thought of, do we want to bring charges? Do we find this person committed a crime? And if so, what's our strongest case that we then are going to take to Pontius Pilate? So
yeah, I looked at it as kind of like the grand jury and the arraignment phase in a criminal trial, right? Like we weren't at disposition, because at any point up until this spot, they could have just walked away. Like, they weren't ready to go full bore into it. They could have been like, there's not enough here to take to the Romans. The Romans aren't going to buy this argument. We got to go figure something else out.
So they called some witnesses in.
Right.
According to the gospel accounts, and some of these witnesses gave false testimony. When they asked Jesus, he said, when it came to, are you the Messiah? And then he said, I am. I forget the exact words there, but basically he admitted, I am the Son of God. And he said, well, this is blasphemy. We have our charges. You are guilty of it. And that's when they decided to take it to the next level. Also interesting under Jewish law that during the time of Passover, of the festivals, they could not hold trials, and they could not hold trials at night. And so that's why there is some scholarly dispute. Yep. Was this actually a trial, or was this more of a grand jury type proceeding that's going to bring these charges before Pilate? All right.
Because there's nothing like splitting hairs during a religious week to figure out like how you can, murder your enemies.
Yes.
Because that's in line with the Gospels.
Then they take Jesus to Pilate. Now, why did they take Jesus to Pilate? Well, again, some of the scholarly articles suggest that they had to, because what they really wanted at the end of the day is they wanted a crucifixion. They wanted the death penalty. It is thought that the Jews, the Sanhedrin, they did have the power to administer the death penalty. Just go back and read Acts, where they actually administered the death penalty against Stephen. So there is some record that reflect that the Sanhedrin does have the power, but clearly all the scholars are in agreement they did not have the power to administer crucifixion as a death penalty. So if that's what they wanted, they had to go to Pontius Pilate and get him a Roman decree saying he was guilty. So they go to Pontius Pilate, and that's where you have a trial before Pontius Pilate. He says some things like, look, I'm not going to find him guilty. I want to hear from him myself. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, what won the day for Pontius Pilate would be in my opinion, the treason charges, as you mentioned earlier. Because look, you say you are the king of the Jews. Hold on a second here. That sounds like it could be treason, because Caesar is the true king here. And are you saying you are above Caesar? That might have been perceived as treason. So I think that was the actual charge at the end of the day under the Roman rule. So hey, that's a quick assessment of the trial of Jesus. It's one of the historical trials. I think the lasting impact from this trial, from a historical perspective, obviously I'm a Christian, so from a religious perspective, we got a lot of other ways that we can go with the story. But from a historical perspective, we're talking about blasphemy charges, because under the Jewish law, they were saying, look, this person is, speaking blasphemy. And Chris, I think historically there is a problem when you combine the criminal justice system and you join that at the hip with the church, I just find historically that's a problem, and we saw that alive and well here with the trial of Jesus. Any concluding thoughts before we move on?
I think also at this time the Jews took Christ to Pontius for the political cover, right? It's not us. The temple workers and the Jewish leaders, we didn't kill Christ. He was found guilty by a Roman court. So I think it gave, and I think that's what they were trying to go for, Caiaphas and all that, and Herod were trying to say, look, they were trying to backdoor the taking down of Christ because they didn't want to have the political fallout for all of his followers.
In other words, if there's a real popular guy here who a lot of people are going to be following him, and you had some people that were raising their voice in dissent, that could have been a mob mentality of let's just rile up the crowds. But still, you have a popular guy with followers. Yeah, those followers are going to be pretty upset. So if you can pass the buck over to the Romans, that might be a desirable thing. So I think you did see a little bit of passing the buck going on there between the Jewish leaders and the Roman leaders. All right, well, since we are talking about religion and the law, a little bit of separation of church issues, let's just make a passing reference to the fact that next week the Supreme Court will be hearing argument in Kennedy v. Bremerton School District. Now, this is a case where Joseph Kennedy was a high school football coach. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just give a bare recitation of the facts here. Basically, he prayed after the games by himself in full view of the students, and consequently, he was fired for praying at the end of football games. Now, I'm doing a little bit of qualifying there because I went ahead and I read the briefs. Well, first of all, I read the issue statements by both Oyez, which is a site, O-Y-E-Z. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. I read their issue statement, and then I read the issue statement on the Supreme Court's website, and my thought was, are these guys talking about the same case? Because they are talking totally opposite. So when I read then I went and I dug up the briefing. The briefing from the school district says this: no, this guy, this football coach was not praying by himself. He was praying with the students. We allowed him to pray by himself, but he was doing it during the game, after the game, with the students. Let me actually read you a little bit from the issue as presented by Oye, and then also by the school district. It says, Joseph Kennedy, a high school football coach, engaged in prayer with a number of students during and after school games. His employer, the Bremerton School District, asked that he discontinue the practice in order to protect the school from a lawsuit based on violation of the Establishment Clause. He refused and instead rallied local and national television, print media, and social media to support him. All right, that's one view of the facts of this case. Now let me read for you the issue as presented by the Coach Kennedy. All right, here's this issue, and this is the one that actually the Supreme Court granted cert on. Petitioner Joseph Kennedy lost his job as a football coach at a public high school because he knelt and said a quiet prayer by himself at midfield after the game ended. Chris, what is it? I mean, is it by himself, or is it a classroom assignment? Which one is it? Because I got to tell you, that's going to make a difference in how the court rules in this case.
Huge difference.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this case? The court will be hearing argument next Monday. I don't know. I guess we have a 6-3 conservative to liberal court. It'd be interesting to see which version of the facts this court adopts.
Right, and I think that's going to be the turning point, because if the facts are he was by himself on the 50-yard line, I don't even think the 3 liberal judges are going to say anything to say, no, he can't do that or whatever. But if he was with the students or made the students come pray with him, that is a whole different, ball of wax to handle. So I think it's going to be on which team, pun intended, can assert the facts to the Supreme Court and the ones that the Supreme Court adopts. Because that's the hinge point, right? Students are the hinge point every time.
We'll be following this case more closely next week after oral arguments to report what issues were important to the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
Well, this week we have a special guest from Seattle, Washington. Tahmina Watson is the founding attorney for Watson Immigration Law there in Seattle, where she practices U.S. immigration law, focusing on business immigration. She is a blogger, been blogging about immigration since 2008, and has written numerous articles in many publications. She's the author of, I like the titles of these two books. We're going to have her talk about these two books, Legal Heroes in the Trump Era, Be Inspired, Expand Your Impact, Change the World, and that's the first book. The second book here is The Startup Visa, Key to Job Growth and Economic Prosperity in America. I'll definitely want to hear about those two books. She's also the founder of the Washington Immigrant Defense Network, which funds and facilitates legal representation in the immigration courtroom. And I love this next thing, co-founder of Airport Lawyers. Now, just the title of that had me sold. I had to know more information about that, which she then provided, which provides critical services during the early travel bans. Hey, Tamina, before I go on, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this podcast.
I'm so grateful you invited me. Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, I just know after we get done with this conversation, my listeners are going to want to know how they can reach you. So right out of the gate, what is the best way to follow you and to reach you and see what you are up to?
Well, I'm so grateful for that opportunity. Number one, anybody can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on that. I am on all the social media platforms, but the best way is my website, which is www.watsonimmigrationlaw.com. There's a contact page, but I also have a blog. So anything that's on social media anywhere starts on the blog. So it could be a one-stop shop.
Now, don't pull over your car to jot that down. We're going to have those in the show notes here on the podcast. So if you didn't write that down, no worries. Just go back to our show notes, and we'll have all those printed out for you. Hey, thanks so much, Tamina, for joining us as we talked in pre-show. You are right there in sunny Seattle, Washington. Is that a little bit of an overstatement?
Oh my goodness, it's such an overstatement. We have something called the atmospheric river here, which means that it rains for days on end. Although this morning there was a little bit of a reprieve, so it wasn't pouring at least.
Right.
But Seattle in the sun is just so beautiful. So all of us in Washington sort of wait, for 10 months to get 2 months of sun.
I love Seattle. I had a conference there in Seattle a couple of years ago. My brother lives there in Eugene, Oregon, so not too far down south. So I went to the conference there. I did realize why your coffee is so delicious. I guess it helps you get through the rainy seasons. I'm not sure. I then hopped on a train and then took that train down from Seattle to Eugene, Oregon. It's great scenery there to see. Have you ever been on that train ride from Seattle?
I've been on that train ride to go to Portland. I've been on that train ride to go to Vancouver, Canada. And honestly, the Pacific Northwest is just incredibly beautiful. If you haven't traveled here, take your next vacation domestically, so you don't have to have tests to go on an international flight.
Right. Now, I'm going to Vancouver here this summer. Is it a good idea to fly into Seattle, then take the train up? In other words, will it be a nice scenic view?
Absolutely. So scenic. It is a very beautiful, comfortable journey on Amtrak all the way to Vancouver downtown.
I got to tell you, it's I grew up in the Midwest, Kansas City, and we really didn't use trains much at all in Kansas City. We love our automobiles, I guess. I don't know. And trains weren't really a big part of growing up. So I never really experienced the train experience. And then I went there and I rode on some trains on the East Coast and West Coast. It's a great way to travel. It was kind of fun going to the drink cart there and getting your food and your drink and sitting down and just see the scenery. It was a lot of fun. Hey, we obviously are going to talk some immigration today. That's why I had you on. You are the guru of all things immigration. By the way, I would be the anti-guru. I really don't know much at all about immigration, so you can just blow some smoke in my direction. I cannot tell the difference. I did have 2 immigration cases, by the way. I won both of them, but that was kind of an accident, not intentional. But before we get there, I want to know the Tahmina Watson story. Everyone has a story, a ministry, I call it, a mission in life, a calling. And I want to know the Tahmina Watson story. How did it come to be that you are now this amazing immigration lawyer? So let's start off with, where did you come from?
Well, I love that question. And it occurred to me to start with something that you just mentioned. Everybody has a story and everybody has a mission. In 2022, I've realized my mission is to talk about love and how important love is in
Really?
every aspect of the world. Yes. I mean, I just was like, I'm working so hard to bring change. Why isn't change happening? And I realized love is the answer. So we'll circle back to that later, but I wanted to make sure I didn't miss saying that because I now have a mission, which I didn't have until 2022. But
We
my
got to unpack
story
that.
is,
We have to unpack what you mean by love is your mission. I am really intrigued. So, hey, that's a great teaser for later on in the podcast. I can't wait till we get to it myself. But, hey, all right. I'm sorry.
me too.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, I was born and raised in London, UK, if you haven't tuned into my accent. But my parents were immigrants to the United Kingdom. They moved from Bangladesh, which is a small country next to India, and that might be in the news or in people's minds because of the Rohingya refugee crisis.
Okay.
That's where my parents were born and raised before Bangladesh became Bangladesh, because it was part of India once upon a time. They moved to the United Kingdom in the 60s and 70s, respectively, dad and mom. And then I was born and I lived there. But when I was 8 to 18, those formative years were lived in Bangladesh. My parents decided to spend some time there. And then we came back to London and I finished my schooling. And as life would happen, I met my husband on a blind date when I was visiting America. Yeah, it was sleepless in Seattle, I tell you. And 3 years of long
Hold on,
distance.
did I miss that? It was a blind date in America?
That's right. I was visiting. And then we had a long distance relationship and eventually here I am. But I was a lawyer in the UK. I was a barrister, which until George Clooney married one didn't mean anything here because I would get confused with somebody who makes coffee and I stopped using the word barrister. But for your listeners' purposes, barrister is a trial attorney who goes to court. In the UK, there's a separation of the profession. There's the trial attorney and the transactional attorney. In the US, it's all one. And so when I moved here, I was living in Washington State and I took the New York bar exams, which was one of the handful I could take. And I wasn't really sure where my life was going to end up. But long story short, I really ended up doing immigration. I went into it kicking and screaming because I didn't really want to do it. But the first day, go ahead.
At what point in your life did you say, I want to be an immigration attorney? Is that why you went to law school, or did doors just open and you went through those doors and it led you to immigration law? How did that journey take place?
I really wanted to be a lawyer. My father was a lawyer when I was young. I saw him go to the various inns of courts. He'd take me to court with him. I'd sit in the hallway with my books. I was just so inspired to be a lawyer. I knew that law was a way to help people. But immigration specifically was something I really wanted to stay away from. Specifically, I saw my father do that. He was an immigration lawyer in the UK. And to me, it was a very community-oriented practice. And it didn't seem to me that I would be wearing the wig all the time. I wanted to wear my wig and gown and be in the crown courts of England. But when I moved here, doors basically opened in immigration only because I was coming from a different background. And also, as you may know, immigration is a federal area of law. Whereas if you want to practice litigation or criminal law, you have to have a state license, which at the time I didn't. But even though I went into it kicking and screaming, and I have to just give a shout out to my mother. She really, really encouraged me to be a lawyer. While I was inspired by watching my father, my mother was the wind beneath my wings, always cheering me on and supporting me in getting to where I am.
So did I hear that right, that both of your parents were lawyers?
No, my mother was a stay-at-home mom at the time. She eventually went into social work, but she really wanted to make sure that I finished my education and definitely followed the path of being a lawyer. But when I moved to the US, suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I was a young baby barrister in the UK. It means nothing here. I have to start afresh. And immigration kept following me. And then eventually I was annoyed and said, well, okay, I might as well just do this for 5 years and then I'll figure out what to do. But the very first day of doing immigration law, I realized that was the calling I was looking for.
Interesting.
And it was meant to be.
So I've always wondered, is it people who do great things in life? Is it that they, as a young person, they said, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint the Sistine Chapel. Or is it they just have great characteristics about themselves, great disciplines, and as doors open, they go through them, and then they realize, oh, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity. And it might have been nothing like what they thought they were going to do when they were a kid. My oldest son is in college, and he's thinking right now, what should he do with his career, right? Is his future? The whole world is his oyster, or however that phrase goes. My youngest son graduated from high school last year. He's kind of in that same mode of life. It's just kind of weird to think about, how did you get to where you are? But it sounds like for you, once you realize the immigration law, that you met that opportunity, it became clear that was your calling.
Yes, and I think one of the things that I, definitely make sure that younger people who ask me questions get this answer, is that preparation meets opportunity, and that's where you go. All I wanted to do was be a lawyer. And in the UK, I did a lot of pro bono work. I mean, I took pro bono work to be my, calling at the time, my vocation. I spent so much time in different practice areas, education law, helping parents with children who needed extra help and couldn't get that help. I helped people who were unemployed and looking for, solutions from their employers. I got training in that. I was doing so much pro bono work that what I realized is that skills that you pick up in any area of law, and you probably agree with this, Joel, is that the skills are transferable. And what the calling is your purpose in life meets that opportunity, and you want to help people. You don't know where that help is going to be. I say to people, every area of law is important. You can be helpful wherever you go. But what makes you special is, where are your skill sets, and what are your values, and how can you bring those to the table to make the biggest impact? And what happened with immigration is that I moved to a different country. I didn't ever feel like an immigrant in the UK, even though my parents were immigrants. I was born and raised there. But suddenly I had this immigrant experience by going from the UK to the US. I had to go through the paperwork. I had to go through the frustrating waiting times. I had to get a work permit, a social security number. I had to learn how to, not use the Z's and S's and use Z's in the spelling. And, there were so many changes that happen in your life that I had the full immigrant experience. And so I also wanted to practice a law that had a direct impact on a person's life, not pushing paper and transaction after transaction, not knowing where the end goal is, or seeing the end of that life cycle of the case. Whereas my work is really transforming lives and livelihoods. And it took me like 15 years to come to that conclusion of, I'm really transforming lives and livelihoods instead of just a case, because I am helping them emigrate, their dreams come true, they're bringing their families together. That is something you cannot put money on, honestly.
I mean, it sounds kind of cliche-ish, but, in elementary school, we were taught that America was the land of opportunity. And so if you are dealing with immigrating to the United States, people are probably looking at that as a great opportunity in their life for generations to come. I mean, once you move here, then your kids are going to be American citizens as well. So, yeah, you actually are helping them transform not only their lives, but their offspring as well. Well, I got to think about that. That's actually pretty much better use of your law degree than my use of my law degree. But I like that saying, the phrase you just said, when preparation meets opportunity. Now, you have no reason to know this, but that's one of my main phrases in life. Not because of some great example you just gave, but when my KU Jayhawks won the national title in 1988, our star player, Danny Manning, said, well, isn't it just lucky that you guys won the national title? He said, nope, preparation meets opportunity. And so we prepared, and then when the opportunity came up, we won the national title. A little different context than what you just mentioned. But all right, well, I want to get into what your thoughts are on immigration, the immigration issues that are going on right now and maybe in the recent past. But before we get there, I want to just throw some softballs out your way just to kind of highlight how ignorant I am when it comes to immigration issues. That's why you're on here. You can set me straight and educate me on all things immigration. But let's just say I want to travel. I want to go to a foreign country. What kind of immigration issues do I need to worry about? Like, let's say I want to go to, Europe, which I think might be a lot easier as compared to going to China. I mean, how does one, even if I want to go live in China or travel there for about 3 months, do I have to worry about immigration?
That's such a great question and such a great way to open this discussion. What is really important for your listeners to understand is every country has borders. Every country is sovereign, they have their own rules, and you have to abide by them. And when you're traveling outside the US or traveling inside the US from a different country, you need to have a document that says you are a real person and you are a citizen of X country. And that is your passport. Your passport is essentially, and the passport word is used in so many different contexts, but it literally means a little tiny book that has a picture of your face, your height, weight, color of your eyeball, and your hair color, but also which country you're from. That is your passport. That allows you to get on a plane. Okay. But to actually get into the country that you are traveling into.
So the plane lands in China.
Mm-hmm.
What do I need?
You are now off. You're deplaning. It takes a frustratingly long time to get off the plane. But now you are stuck behind a very long line of people to say, I have the right paperwork. That paperwork is generally a visa. Now, you mentioned Europe. It's easy. It's because most countries in Europe and the US have what's called reciprocity. They have a mutual agreement of waiving visa requirements. They are going to say, because we have this understanding, you don't need a visa, just waive your passport. But China, Indonesia, other countries will possibly want you to have a little stamp saying somebody at an embassy saw your passport, took your money, and said, why are you coming to visit our country? We will vet you and say, yes, you can come and visit for 3 months.
Okay, so how long does that take?
Every embassy is different and every country has different rules, different fees. What I will say is you have to do your own research about which country you're going to and do you need a visa. And then you have to go to that embassy's website to figure out what the steps are. Some embassies will say come in person. Some embassies will allow an intermediary. Some will just allow you to mail it in. I'll give you a current example. Just the other way, I've been speaking to a lot of Ukrainian citizens and Russian citizens who are trying to come in. And I'll just take the Russian example. Russian and Ukrainian citizens have been declared stateless. So I just described to you the passport, which will say you are a citizen of X country. But when you are declared stateless by the United States, it means that you can go to any embassy in the world, US embassy, to try to get a US visa. One of my recent discussions, or several discussions with Russian citizens who are sort of trying to come here, is which embassy can they go to without needing a visa to go to that embassy, and which embassy is going to have the least amount of waiting time. Now, I cannot spend the time and charge money to do that research. A lot of people are doing that, but I'm showing them the roadmap of those are the primary things to look at. So it goes to your question about what do you need.
Now, you actually just kind of led into my next question. I have some friends in the Ukraine, and I was talking to them the other day because I was just kind of concerned about their welfare. So how does immigration work in wartime? I mean, this is the first time in my life that this actually has been an issue, at least that I remember. I'm back in Iraq when Kuwait was invaded by Iraq. I guess we went to war then. So we're in wartime now, and my friends they went from the Ukraine to New Jersey, and they're staying with their daughter. So they must have gotten some kind of visa to go over there pretty quickly, but they still have some relatives back in the Ukraine. Just talk a little bit about how immigration issues are impacted by wartime activities.
That's such a great question, and it's my first issue in my lifetime too, especially as an immigration attorney. I want to mention two things before I answer that question. Number one, that friend of yours that is here, they would likely be able to benefit from the temporary protected status that was just granted by the Biden administration 2 weeks ago. And so that is very important, because while they might have had permission to come in, it's for a very limited amount of time. And so that temporary protected status allows somebody to stay here for 18 months, but they have to fulfill some paperwork. And to piggyback on that, I'm in the process of organizing some training events to train lawyers like you, Joel, to be able to help the vast amount of people that need help. So that was the one thing I was going to say. The second thing I will say is the wartime issues that we are seeing are reminiscent of what happened in the Second World War. And you and I weren't there to see what happened. But this administration and recent administrations haven't really seen that specific issue. So it's not that there are a shortage of humanitarian crises around the world, whether it's the southern border that's in the news all the time, or Africa, or different parts of the world. What's different about this is one country is invading another in a way that we would not expect. And the words nuclear threat are not a threat anymore. They're not theoretical. They're real. So the seriousness of the situation is significantly elevated from any other way. Now, what I wanted to mention is, as of this morning, NBC has breaking news that the Biden administration is trying to create some program for a specific group of Ukrainians to get here in an expeditious manner. I don't know what that is yet. It just landed in my inbox in the last half an hour. So if your listeners are interested, they can go to the NBC website to find that particular information. But for anybody who is generally outside the US, who are Ukrainians who are now dispersed in various parts of Europe, this question is on their minds. How can I get to the United States? Now, of the 4 million or 3 million that have been displaced, what I do want to say is I don't think everybody wants to be in the US. So what the numbers really are, I don't really know. But what we do know is we need a good, efficient way to get those people who want to be here in an expeditious manner. Now, number one, there is the tourist visa. Very difficult to get. Ukraine does not have a US embassy that is functional at the moment, but the Ukrainian citizens have been designated to go to Frankfurt, Germany. Now, Frankfurt, Germany is taking a very long time to see people, a year out. So that is not expeditious. But I did mention earlier that stateless people can go to any other embassy. So if somebody who has the resources and the means to go to an embassy and who does the research I just mentioned, they could possibly go to another embassy to get a tourist visa. But there are lots of pros and cons with that, and it will be too much in the weeds to go into it. But if anybody's interested, maybe go find some of my articles that I've written. The second thing that is really important for people to know is these are people who are now refugees. We do have a refugee criteria. Now, the refugee criteria that exists has been there for a very long time. But that visa category takes years and years to process. It doesn't solve the immediate problem that we need. So while it is a good option, we need people to get here sooner rather than later. Now the third option, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned both from Ukraine and from Russia. So are we seeing people from both countries wanting to flee those countries, I guess, because they're in the middle of war? I guess I always thought about it from the perspective of the Ukrainians. I didn't think about it from the perspective of the Russians as well.
Until I started getting the calls, I was very much focused on the Ukrainian nationals. But there are a lot of people who do not support the war in Russia. And now suddenly they are at risk. There are people who have been in Russia who are US citizens, and they've lived there for a long time with, Russian family members. And suddenly they are thinking about leaving the country, but it's not easy at all. The borders are closed in Russia as well. And so these questions are very nuanced, but they're also trending issues. And essentially what's happening in the world, always reflects on my practice, believe it or not. When there's a recession, I'm getting the calls about, oh my gosh, I've lost my job. Right. Afghanistan had, a humanitarian crisis. Immediately I start getting calls. And it's really interesting what I wanted to do. You started off with what did I want to do and how did I get into law? I wanted to make an impact on people's lives. And boy, am I doing that. And I get to have a front seat.
Right. Oh, fleeing a war. I can't think of anything more important as far as helping someone out in a moment of strife. All right, Fat, did I cut you off on your third point? You're about to go to a third point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the third point is we saw that play out with the Afghan humanitarian crisis. Now, different type of crisis, but nevertheless a humanitarian crisis. And there was a program, there is something in the law called humanitarian parole. Now, I want your listeners to know that parole in this context means permission to be in the United States. You're admitting somebody to be here with permission. It's not like a get out of jail card, essentially. But it's based on there is a humanitarian reason for somebody to be here. Now, you, me, any American citizen or green card holder can sponsor anybody. There doesn't have to be a familial relationship for that. So in the Afghan national situation, 40,000 applications, and actually probably more since I last did the statistics review, have been filed. And these are individual applications. Those applications have proven to be difficult. The standards have risen since the Afghan crisis happened, but they're also lengthy in processing time. Most of them are being denied. That has demonstrated that the Ukrainian nationals need a different type of humanitarian parole system. And that is where the NBC News program that I just mentioned will likely tie in. And in they are likely going to say, we will use the humanitarian parole program to create a special program for these types of people, and they'll have parameters. I will direct your listeners to read my articles. I have a bi-weekly column in Above the Law, and the most two recent articles are about these options, where I talk a little bit more in depth about what they are and why they can be useful. So I'm interested to see what unfolds in the next couple of days.
Oh, man, you are on the cutting edge. All right, now, I know we just got into the real heavy there. I meant to start off on the light, right? Hey, I'm traveling about, and then we got right into wartime. So we went right into the heavy stuff, but I want to just backtrack a little bit, because I'm trying to get a full understanding of immigration, and this actually is a personal issue. I'll just lay it out there. I just got back from a cruise from Bonaire and Curacao, and I want to buy a condo in Bonaire. It's just an amazing place there. I went there and talked to some of the real estate agents out there, looked at some condos. What kind of immigration issues does someone have to think about if they want to buy a vacation condo in one of these, foreign places like Bonaire or Curacao?
Outgoing immigration is not my forte necessarily, but I can talk a lot about what people have to think about when they come here to the US. But as a, general issue, I would say, are you allowed to own property, in Vietnam, Cambodia, Dubai? There are different countries where property ownership is allowed or not allowed. You have to have part ownership with a citizen, whether it's a business or property. And I don't know the ins and outs, but I understand that there are nuanced ownership laws that you must look into. And I think when you're thinking about buying a property abroad, do you need a residential visa? Can you just, we just talked about waiving your passport. Do you need something like that to actually live there or own property? So I think those are the primary things I would think about. The other thing I would say is, and this was something that I had personal experience with recently, what about health insurance? It is a big deal to, and I was just speaking about it with my husband last night. If you have health insurance in the United States,
Right.
Will you get coverage in a different country? What if you, trip, accidentally and suddenly your arm is broken? Or, you need some treatment for a sudden, I don't know, heart attack.
Right. Right.
How do you get treatment for that? And I think those would be my top three things to look at, that if you're going to be somewhere else outside the US, how do you make sure that you are safe and nobody's going to bother you? But the question I get generally is, I want to live in the United States. I just want to retire, be here for 6 months. What do I do? And people do buy their houses in Florida or
Right.
Scottsdale, somewhere sunny and beautiful near a beach, or Hawaii. You can buy a house as a foreign national in the U.S.
Okay.
The
Right.
treasury will be happy to take your money, and they will do that. The question becomes, how often can you come here and stay here? And this is where, that waiving of the passport becomes very important.
Right.
A lot of people who are coming to the US can waive their passport and stay here for 90 days, not beyond. And COVID brought a lot of challenges to those people. Actually, a story for another time. But we do not have a residential visa. We only have work visas or green cards to stay, and none of them are easy. There's no retiree visa, although over the last decade there have been proposals for retiree visas. We don't have it. But the other thing that people don't think about are taxes. In the United States, I'm not a tax expert, but I often will refer my clients to tax experts. If you have been in the United States for about, I think it's 180 days, suddenly you are a tax resident. How does that interplay into your, life? I don't know. Only a tax attorney can tell you. But those are some of the, issue spotting things that one must keep on their checklists.
Interesting. Well, all I noticed was the beautiful beaches and the sand. But hey, I guess I should look at taxes as well. All right. Well, I'm done with the softballs. Now I want to throw in fastball, high and tight. I like my baseball metaphors. So, again, I have an immigration lawyer on this podcast. I got to take advantage of this. I want the truth about what's going on at the border. I mean, I got to admit, and I'm being totally honest here, I don't get it. I've had a lawsuit there in El Paso, Texas, and so while I was there, I wanted to go across the border, and my local counsel there, she said, no, you don't go across the border. It might take you forever getting back. So I had very, very, very limited experience. But the reason why I don't know what's going on at the border is, it seems like since the border, it kind of touches on politics. I say touches, that might be an understatement. It involves politics. Everything I hear, I got to wonder, is someone distorting the truth here? I mean, do you actually know what is going on at the border? Can you, in real dummy, layman language, explain to me what our border crisis is all about without the guise of politics?
Absolutely. And it's a very complicated issue that is very difficult to simplify, but I will try my best as far as I understand it. But before I say what I will say, I do want to mention a book I recently read. And the book was written by Sonia Nazario. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and she had gone on to do some investigative journalism herself, and wrote this book called Enrique's Journey. And it is difficult read, but very enlightening to see what happens to people who are in South America trying to cross the border coming to the US, and all the journeys they have to face just to get across the Rio Grande River.
Right.
And it will shed light on some of these issues. As far as I understand, and remember, I'm an immigrant, and all of the things that are happening at the border are really a culmination of decades of issues in the triangle over there. But essentially, in a very simple way to describe it, people who are fleeing for their lives are trying to come into the United States to just be alive, just stay alive. Right. There are women, there are children. These men, women, children are facing different types of persecutions, and they just want to come in. And what happens is the southern border obviously hits across, there's Mexico, people from Guatemala are coming, and Honduras. There are a lot of people who are trying to come here. And the United States border is what is essentially, we wanted to have a wall, we don't have a wall, but we do, what comes into the politics is the security of it. And what is happening is the immigration service is trying to have a control over who can come in and who cannot come in. And that's where everything becomes very divisive, in the discussions where politics meets law and enforcement as well. Law enforcement, the rule of law, and politics. That's as simple as I can make it without making it any more difficult. But what really happens is when somebody comes to your borders and says, I want to have asylum,
right,
international laws, the United States laws all say we should allow them to have an opportunity to prove their lives are in danger. And how that is being conducted is where the rubber hits the road. And what I will say is this administration obviously is coming on the heels of a previous administration that had caused a lot of noise. And, we heard a lot about caravans during election times, and we didn't see the caravans after that. So what was orchestrated, what was not orchestrated, I am not one to say, because I don't know the details, but one thinks. These are seeds and food for thought. Right. But the crisis in the southern border is a culmination of decades of policies. Right. And what you have heard from the Biden administration is that they're trying to go to the root of the problem. And, this complexity will not be solved in one day. And so many parties have to come and collaborate. And so that's all I can say about it, because it's bigger than you and bigger than me and bigger than anybody who's listening to this. But what I will say is that we have incredible leadership. Even though a lot of people might say I'm not seeing it, we have incredible leadership at the Department of Homeland Security. And we have incredible leadership at the USCIS. And we have an administration that really wants to solve the problem. The trouble is that there are lots of external problems that are coming in while we have a broken system that they're trying to fix as well.
Well, let me throw an idea out there just to see what you think about it. Because, again, I am not an expert at all. I had 2 immigration cases. And in those 2 immigration cases, what I learned was there is a tremendous backlog of immigration cases. And for us to even, run one of those cases through, I mean, it would take months, if not even over a year, before we even got a response. Is it that we lack the judicial manpower to even process these immigration cases through? Is that part of the problem?
That's a really astute observation. And yes, that's part of the problem, but not the only problem. When you talk about backlog, there are backlogs in every aspect of immigration at this point, whether it's the court, whether it's trying to get a green card, whether it's trying to just go to the embassy around the world. And there are different reasons for having that. There was already a backlog before the previous administration came along. And our system was set in the 1950s and 60s.
Okay.
And if you think about the world as it is now, it has evolved so many times over. We have better technology, we have globalization. The laws that we have do not reflect the modern day life that we have. And so we really do need to have laws that fit these times, and we don't. So the law was already broken, the system was already broken. And then we had an administration that trampled on it. Essentially, they took a broken thing and, trampled on it. So we have a system in which the court system, if you like, is really under the Department of Justice. So it doesn't have the independence that it needs to be able to function as best as it could. And what we saw from the previous administration, that there were lots of restrictions and controls that were being put on judges and the system in and of itself. So the backlog has evolved and grown exponentially, and it's very difficult to now resolve that. This administration is trying, and we'll see where it goes. But there are efforts to try to reduce the backlog.
Hey, have you ever thought about running for office? It is now time for Courtroom Quarterback. Now, Chris, there are a couple issues here I want us to just briefly touch on. The first one is today, April 15th, is not National Tax Day. It's the day that usually I fear greatly. I tremble on April 15th. No, this is a day of celebration. It is Jackie Robinson Day. Explain, why is this Jackie Robinson Day?
So on this day, April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson made his debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers. He is the first recognized black player to play in the modern day MLB.
Okay. Huge deal. Now, I don't think he was the first athlete or African-American athlete to play professional sports. I think that was in football, but definitely during this time period, baseball was the sport of America. It was America's pastime. And the sports were segregated. You had your African-American league, and then you had your Caucasian league. And this was the first day that they decided we're going to break the collar barrier, and Jackie Robinson became the first player, a huge deal. He then became a Hall of Fame player for the Brooklyn Dodgers. At some point in time, they might have moved over to Los Angeles. He had to cross country. I'm not sure when that exactly happened.
1958.
Well, see, that's why we have you on here. You have the information.
Baseball is life, man. Baseball is life in the Marone household.
So this is my one thought, and I'll let you give a thought if you want afterwards. I really believe that sports is a great opportunity for the integration of the races because I really truly believe in my heart of hearts. You might think, Joel, you're crazy, you're naive, you live in la la land. But I've been involved in sports a long time at a lot of different levels. Now, not the professional level, but I follow professional sports probably more than the people who get paid to follow professional sports. It is my passion. I used to have a sign up in the house that says, "We interrupt this marriage to bring you the football season." I care deeply about sports. So this is my take. I think the first and foremost concern of those people that are actively involved in sports is to win. You want to win the game. Yes. You want to beat the other side. If you are a player, the competitive juices start flowing. Yes, obviously you want to get a paycheck as well. It is a business. But still, when you are between the lines, you want to win the game. I don't even know if I've ever even gotten into a tennis match where I'm actually in the middle of a tennis match, and I said to myself, yeah, I don't really care if I win this. You know what? It could go either way. No, you want to win the game. Now, in order to win the game, you have to have the best players. So there, Branch Rickey, who I believe was, I don't know if he was the owner or
manager.
The manager, okay. They were saying, look, we want the best players to win the game. So when we don't allow people like Jackie Robinson, these absolutely amazing talents of baseball to play, that's hurting our chances. This is stupid. This is idiotic. So he did a very brave thing at that moment in time. And I believe it was because they wanted they wanted to do what is right, but they also want to put the best player out there. And I believe that is what is, that's why I think sports is such a good opportunity to allow for fairness amongst the races, because people really don't care that much about the race. They want to win the game. So I don't know. Any thoughts on that? I know that's naive and to a certain extent. Maybe that's just my hope and desire, and so that people don't really care about the color of skin.
I think that in 2022 that is the right take to have, is that you want to win. So you want to put the best players on the field or on the court or whatever. I think the take back in 1947 was not that at all. It was the automatic assumption that African-American, blacks, people of color, indigenous people were all inferior. And
no, I get that. But are you thinking that Branch Rickey said, what was his motivation? And maybe it was a little bit of both. Was his motivation, I want to do this because I want to break down the barriers between the races, even though I don't think that Jackie Robinson is that good of a baseball player? Or was he saying, you know what, Jackie Robinson is an incredible baseball player. I want him on our team. That's going to help us win baseball games, and that is the right thing to do. It's probably a little bit of
both.
hey, I want to win baseball games and I want to help break down the barriers between the races.
I think it's both. I think that Branch Rickey knew that African American players could play just as well or better than some of the Caucasian players. I think that Branch Rickey was ahead of his time in thinking of how to integrate baseball, but I also think he wanted to win. So he saw unequivocal, amazing talent in Jackie Robinson, which stand alone. Take color and race out of the mix. Jackie Robinson's numbers are Hall of Fame without him being black. So you see this amazing player that happens to be black, and Branch Rickey in his head feeling, at this point, it's 1947. So the military has been desegregated, right? It's pre-Brown versus Board of Education, so there's still a lot of hot racial issues. There's still, whites only, coloreds only type places. So Branch Rickey wants to win, but I think he also wants to be like, this guy can play, so let's play. I honestly don't think that Branch Rickey would have taken a chance on a mediocre player.
Interesting.
He would not have taken a mediocre African-American player and said, we need to desegregate baseball. He picked the best player humanly possible available to him at that time, and he brought them into the Brooklyn. And I think it parallels a lot, right? You have the 1965-66 Texas Western Miners, right? We just had Final Four not too long ago, right? So the Texas Western team that played 5 black players against Adolph Rupp's Kentucky, and they won the NCAA championship, and that had never been done before, right? Because you don't play black players, and this is 20 years later.
You brought up I hate to say a sore subject with me, but because it's not really a sore subject, but I do got to comment on it. The example you just gave was, I believe, is the team you said it was Texas Western,
which is now UTEP.
UTEP, right? Yeah. Do you know that game should not have happened? UTEP versus Kentucky, because in the semifinals, in the first round of the Final Four, who did UTEP play?
They played
KU
Kansas,
Jayhawks,
and he stepped out of bounds.
JoJo did not step out of bounds.
JoJo was clearly out of bounds.
Hit the game-winning shot, and said, "Nope, sorry, you were out of bounds." And so KU lost. And so,
wasn't it double overtime too?
It was. It was just an amazing game there, and KU should have won that game. JoJo White hit the winning shot, but the refs threw it out. And then you had obviously the great classic game of UTEP. Texas Western against Kentucky, where Kentucky lost, and I know the racial significances of that win. It's also nice to see Kentucky lose. Can I say that it's just always nice to see Kentucky lose? I have no problem with that. Sorry, I know I have some UK listeners here for this podcast, but I gotta say it. And one time I wore my baseball, my KU hat. It was 2008. KU had just won the national championship in basketball. I am at Disney World wearing my KU hat. Some stranger comes up to me, and do you know what that stranger asked me?
Are you a Kentucky fan?
Exactly. I almost popped the guy. What? Oh. No, it's KU, not UK.
Oh, no. I was in New Orleans last week at the Final Four when KU won.
No.
And I was walking down Decatur towards Canal Street. I'm setting the scene here. It's the quarter. It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning after KU's victory. And some guy is outside of the Ruby Slipper Cafe on Decatur. And he's talking to him about what a great team Kentucky is. And the guy's laid out in KU Jayhawks. And it just says KU. And he's like, at some point that guy realizes that KU isn't Kentucky University.
Right. Oh, my goodness. What are we going to do? It is KU, not UK. Well, obviously, one last thought here, because if I have a chance, an opportunity to dig on Tom Brady, I'm going to take it. And there was a report this last week. Do you remember when Tom Brady retired? Do you remember that day?
I do. It was like 6 weeks ago.
Oh, I was rejoicing. I think I was texting you with so much glee.
We were
high-fiving,
sending memes back and forth.
Exactly. I just loved it. Well, turns out possibly that was fraud. He never really intended to retire because it's coming out now that he was in some backroom negotiations with Miami to become the starting quarterback for Miami. And so that was the thought all along. But backroom talk discussions, there's another word for that. it's called tampering. You cannot do that if you're under contract with some team. And so the thought was, I'll just retire and maybe they'll let me out of the contract, and that will allow for me to then go play for the Miami Dolphins. Well, what happened after Tom Brady retired and this plan was set in motion?
Brian Flores.
The Brian Flores lawsuit came out where it was alleged that Tom Brady met or was going to have a meeting with the owner, or was it Tom Brady, but it was Brian Flores going to have a meeting with the owner of the Miami Dolphins, and Tom Brady was going to just happen to be there.
Yes.
So this, well, hold on a second here. Well, hold on. So there's this tampering, this desire of Tom Brady to be with the Miami Dolphins has been around for several years. Okay, well, and if that's the case, maybe there's some truth here. If all of a sudden Tom then becomes in Miami Dolphins, the timing was not good. It was not a good look because of the Brian Flores lawsuit. And so maybe that's why they got blown up. And so Tom said, well, I'm sure Steg's not going to be staying home. And so I might as well go back and play with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So again, that report is out there. Who knows how much of it is true, but I want it to be true. And so I am following it very closely. And so there you go. Any final thoughts here before we go out and enjoy our Easter weekend?
I hope this brings down the Brady. I really does. Brady's a great player and he's changed the game. And yes, he has a bunch of Super Bowl rings, but some of that stuff has always been marred with Deflategate and questionable decisions. And, it just makes me really sad that that could happen. But at the same time, I'm really excited to have this ferreted out. I want him down. I want it gone. And then I want Tom Brady in San Francisco. Just putting that out there.
Hey, retire already, Tom. Retire. Right. You have boys. You have kids at home, and then they need their daddy. So, all right.
All right.
That being said, have a great Easter weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a 5-star review. We need your love to help us continue highlighting the funnier side of the law. I want to give a special shout out to our Vice President of Operations, Wendy Oster, without whom this entire operation would be a complete and utter mess. Sean Wynn and 15-5 Features for making me sound way better than I actually do. Brooke Bolin for our marketing efforts, and Ryan Kuhn and Paul Kuhn of Triplicity Marketing for our technical and computer support.